In the US, more than 600,000 people go missing every year, so there surely are some strange cases. Some return home safely, or are found. But the most strange and mysterious thing is that some people are never found. This Iceberg video will discuss some of the deepest unsolved cases of kidnapped and missing persons. We will progress from the more well-known and mysterious ones, all the way down to the more disturbing and weird cases that have never been solved. We'll start at the tip of the iceberg with D.B. Cooper. On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, Dan Cooper, now mistaken as D.B. Cooper by the media, bought a one-way ticket with cash on a flight bound for Seattle from Portland to begin one of the great unsolved mysteries in FBI history. Cooper was described as a quiet man in his 40s, wearing a black suit and tie with the white undershirt. During the flight, he ordered a drink and remained disinterested before he set his plan in motion. Just after 3 p.m., he called on a stewardess and gave her a note containing a description of the bomb he had in an attached briefcase where he was sitting and demanded her to sit. The stewardess complied, and she sat down after he showed her the supposed bomb from his briefcase. Cooper ordered the now scared stewardess to take down a note which he dictated to her, demanding $200,000 in $20 bills and 4 parachutes in exchange for the passengers. When the stewardess announced their situation, the crew began to make plans to comply with them to avoid casualties. As soon as the plane landed in Seattle, Cooper exchanged the 36 passengers for his demand of money and parachutes. But he kept pilots and other crew members and ordered them to take off for Mexico City. Around 8 p.m., between Seattle and Reno, Cooper dived out of the plane with some of the parachutes and the ransom money before the pilots landed safely. The FBI launched an investigation into the case, and after following several tips and possible leads, decades later, Dan Cooper was never found and his true identity was never discovered. Nobody could tell exactly what happened to him after he dived out of the plane that night. Unlike Dan Cooper's case of stealing and getting away with it, this one is quite sad. Harold Holt was the 17th Prime Minister of Australia and about the 3rd person to die in office. Harold Holt was almost an ordinary man, with the same routines as every other human, except his peculiar love for the ocean, especially spearfishing. It was known that spearfishing was his happy activity and the only thing he could escape to do at all times. His friends and associates had been concerned about his risky hobby, especially since he almost drowned a few months before his disappearance. But he always made jokes about it because what are the odds that a prime minister would drown or be taken by a shark? Not long before his disappearance, his doctor had warned him to avoid over-pushing himself and to cut back on swimming and tennis because of his health and medications. But on Sunday 17th December 1967, Holt had a relatively normal day, taking calls and hanging out with friends. In the afternoon, while in the company of his friends heading back home, Holt asked them to stop at Cheviot Beach for a swim as the weather was too hot. Amidst protests that the water current was not good enough, Holt swam deeper into the water. His companions began to call for help when he neither raised his arm for help nor resurfaced after he slipped under the waves. Over 300 searchers commenced the rescue operation, but his body was neither found nor was there any trace of him. 5 days later, he was declared dead. This is the story of one of America's most popular disappearances. Beerus was an American journalist, fiction writer, and Civil War veteran. He is most famous for authoring The Devil's Dictionary, a book consisting of common words followed by humorous and satirical definitions. Beerus was known for his satirical comments and as a pioneer in the realist fiction genre. In his day, his views tended to get him and his employers in trouble, but it didn't stop him from giving them. Some expert commentators in the literary world have speculated that he may be the greatest satirical writer America has ever produced. Beerus was very passionate about recounting the war stories he had derived from his time in the military. Until the end of his life, if there was anything that made him angry the most, it was people who told stories about the honor and glory of war without personally experiencing it. Because of his attachment to his war history, Beerus traveled from Washington, D.C. in October 1913 at the age of 71 for a tour of his old Civil War battlefields, and to visit Mexico to gain first-hand experience of the Mexican Revolution. His last known communication with the world was a letter dated December 26, 1913, to his friend. Theories and speculations about his sudden disappearance suggested that he may have committed suicide in a selected location, but nothing was ever proved. StExup has a history of near-death experiences, and it makes his unsolved disappearance a sadder one. In his time, he was a French writer known for his award-winning novella, The Little Prince, a journalist, poet, and an avid aviator. Before World War II, StExup was a commercial pilot working between Europe, Africa, and South America. He later joined the French Air Force during the war. One of his well-known near-death experiences was his crash into the Libyan desert in 1935 after spending more than 19 hours in the air participating in a race. He was rescued days later by the locals after suffering from dehydration and bad weather conditions. StExup took a gap year in America for 28 months before returning to war. In the time leading to his disappearance, he went into depression after being accused by his superior of working for the Germans, which resulted in heavy drinking. On July 31st, 1944, he took off for his last mission to collect intelligence on some German troops. He didn't make it back and vanished without a trace. In 1998, a fisherman found a bracelet belonging to StExup, far from his original route. And in 2000, a small piece of debris from his plane was recovered by a diver and is now housed in a museum. Glenn Miller thrived at being a band leader as a civilian and a military personnel. He and his orchestra were one of the most successful bands of the 20th century, and he is personally considered the father of modern US military bands. He had volunteered to join the US Army to entertain troops during World War II, from where he ended up in the US Army Air Forces. Soon, Miller's band became the favorite of many military personnel. In December 1944, Miller and his band were scheduled to move from England to France. On the 13th, his flight was cancelled due to bad weather, which only caused him to worry as they were already behind schedule with their plans. He started to seek alternative means of transportation as his reservation for the next day was also cancelled for the same reason. Now, frustrated and impatient, Miller made calls and learned that an acquaintance would be traveling to France on the 15th, so he joined in. Sadly, Miller and the other occupants of the flight did not make it to France. His superiors ordered a search and investigation, which was fruitless as the plane and its occupants were never seen again. A year and a day after his disappearance, Miller was declared dead as per military practice, and a headstone was commissioned for him in the memorial section of the military cemetery. Michael Rockefeller was a prominent American, the son of the former governor of New York and US Vice President Nelson Rockefeller. Rockefeller was known as an exceptional Harvard student who graduated cum laude and did research work, studying cultures and tribes in affiliation with the university. After his brief military career, he went on an expedition for Harvard's Peabody Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology to study tribes in New Guinea. This led him to the Asmat tribe of the same region, which drew his interest, and he went back to study the people's culture and possibly collect their distinctive woodwork art. Rockefeller engaged with the people's culture, took records, and sent letters back home sharing some of his experiences and what he had been up to. On November 17, 1961, Rockefeller and his companion were on the canoe getting close to shore when the boat was swamped and overturned. Their local guide swam to get help, but the help did not come early. On the 19th, since they had drifted for a while, Rockefeller offered to swim to shore since they were close, but he was never seen again. People speculated that he may have died from exposure, exhaustion, or drowning. Other accounts emerged that members of neighboring tribes must have eaten him since cannibalism still existed in that region during the period. We've had only individuals or a few people going missing from the initial stories, but how did over 120 people vanish into thin air with little to no traces? The Rowanoak Colony was an attempt by Sir Walter Raleigh to establish the first permanent English settlement on American soil in present-day North Carolina. The colony was founded in 1585, with Sir Raleigh's family members as part of its members. His granddaughter became the first baby to be born in the colony on American soil during their stay there. After a short while, the colony began to lack basic supplies, and they also had trouble relating with the Native Americans living close by. It became necessary for the crew to return home to get resources and enough manpower to see them through their stay in the New World. The first resupply mission was delayed and another commenced. But between the missions, a fight broke out between the Spanish and English, which required all the ships around to be sent into battle. The ship sent for resupply was delayed for about 3 years and was unable to go back. When the ship finally returned to the colony, the crew met a mysterious sight as they found no trace of their family members and the other people. they found a cryptic message carved on a tree that said, Croatoan. This was interpreted to mean that maybe members of the colony relocated to Croatoan Island. The mystery surrounding their disappearance saw a lot of theories and speculations, some of which strongly believe that they have been accepted into the nearby Indian communities. Joseph Crater was a New York State Supreme Court judge who went missing on the streets of Manhattan, near Times Square on August 6, 1930. His disappearance earned him the title, the missingest man in New York. Crater had vanished just after the New York State began an investigation into corruption in the city. Crater and his wife had initially been on vacation at their summer cabin in Maine. After receiving an undisclosed call, he left his wife at the cabin in July of 1930, telling her that he needed to straighten those fellows out, with a promise to be back to her in a short while. He returned to the cabin in August and left with a promise to return for her birthday. When he arrived at the city, he spent hours in his chambers going through files and destroying documents. He instructed his clerk to cash 2 checks for him, which amounted to $5,150 at the time. At noon, Crater and his clerk carried 2 locked briefcases, which would later go missing to his apartment. In the evening, Crater reserved 1 seat for a comedy called Dancing Partner with his friend and went on for dinner with another group of friends. Crater went missing just after the dinner by either entering a taxicab or walking down the street, which was the varying accounts given by his 2 dinner companions. His suspicious behavior in the days leading to the disappearance made people speculate that he must have fled the country with one of his mistresses. His disappearance triggered a dramatic manhunt and investigation after the news broke, but nothing turned up. His sensational story captured so much media attention that the phrase "pulling a crater" briefly entered the public vernacular as a synonym for going AWOL. At his wife's request, Joseph Force Crater was declared legally dead in 1939. We're used to seeing mysteries unfold in movies, but it's not often that those movies end up becoming real-life mysteries. Tammy Leopard was an actress and beauty queen who was cast on the set of the 1983 film Scarface. From her mother's account, Tammy had come back from attending a party as a different person, and she had begun acting strangely afterwards. Her behavior drew concerns from family and friends as she acted hysterical sometimes and broke down at intervals. Upon inquiries, she admitted that she had seen something she could not talk about for fear that they would come after her. Nobody knew or had a clue about the they that she referred to, but that was her story. While on the movie set for Scarface, Tammy had reported experiencing a breakdown after watching a scene where someone was supposed to be shot with fake blood coming out of their body. Tammy had been taken away, and her family friend was called upon to take her. According to Wing Flanagan, Tammy had some rough days, resulting in smashing windows in her home and attacking him. Tammy was admitted to a mental health center after the incident for 72 hours and was later allowed to go. She had told her best friend afterward that she might be away for a while and had met up with another friend the next day. Tammy began arguing with him, and she asked to be dropped off barefoot and with no purse 5 miles from her house. The 18-year-old actress was last seen walking away, and nobody could account for her disappearance, with some speculating that she may have been a victim of a serial killer. The story gets even more mysterious and puzzling with the unsolved case of the Fort Worth trio. How far from home can 3 underaged young people go? The bizarre disappearances of Rachel Trilissa, aged 17, Lisa Renee Wilson, aged 14, and the youngest, Julie Mosley, aged 9, continue to be one of Fort Worth's most troubling mysteries. It has all the components for a made-for-TV drama: a suspicious letter, strange phone calls, dredged swamps, bones, teeth, and cars pulled from a lake, except it's not on TV, but in real life. The girls left home together in December 1974 to shop for Christmas at the Seminary South Shopping Center in Fort Worth, Texas. The girls left home early enough and had specifically wanted to be back before 4 p.m. because Renee had a Christmas party she wanted to attend with her new boyfriend, and she was very excited about it. Their families began to worry when the girls neither returned home nor contacted anybody to say that they were running late. Their families arrived at the mall at about 6 p.m. to find their car in the parking lot with their shopping bags, but not the young girls. All efforts to find the young girls yielded no positive feedback, and some people began to speculate that they were runaways. But how possible is it for young girls to run away just before Christmas? The next day, Rachel, who had been married at the time, supposedly sent a letter to her husband saying that they went away to Houston and would return in a week. The letter has been disputed by most people, including their parents, because it looked wrong from the misspelled names to the generic formality of the writing. Glenn and Bessie Hyde's disappearance remains one of the greatest mysteries of Grand Canyon history. Over the years, many theories and speculations have been derived as to what happened to the newlyweds on their trip, but nothing has led to their possible whereabouts. Glenn and Bessie attempted to run the rapids of the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon, Arizona in 1928. If they had succeeded, Bessie would have been the first woman to accomplish that feat, but unfortunately, it did not happen. Glenn Hyde was an experienced river runner, but not Bessie. After their marriage, Glenn had built a boat intending to make the run for their honeymoon trip to set a new speed record while also putting his wife in the record books. The couple commenced their honeymoon and they were last spotted on November 18, 1928, when they had hiked out of the canyon to resupply a few days earlier. At the south rim, the couple approached a photographer to take a picture of them before they returned down to the canyon. When nothing was heard from them again, Glenn's father started a search for them even before the couple was considered overdue to return home. On December 19, a search plane spotted their boat with intact supplies still strapped in. Glenn and Bessie were nowhere to be found, but a camera and journal belonging to Bessie were retrieved from the boat. Speculations about their disappearance suggest they may have been swept out of the boat. But in May 1992, the death of the famous rafter Georgie Clark sparked rumors that she may have been Bessie because of some documents and a pistol recovered after her demise, but nothing was proven. Rarely will something as big as an airplane get lost with no leads to finding it or its passengers, because an aircraft is not exactly small but larger than life. On 11 September 1990, the worst happened after a Fawcett Peru Boeing 727 airliner disappeared around a part of the Atlantic Ocean, estimated to be within Cape Race, Canada. The aircraft was returning from Malta to its original destination of Peru after it had been given out on a loan to another airline. The aircraft had crew members, airline employees, and their families aboard, totaling about 16 occupants. All was going well with the aircraft they stopped en route to refuel before continuing the journey. Nothing seemed at stake until they placed a distress call alerting the crew that they were going to ditch because the aircraft was low on fuel. After the message, nothing else was ever heard from the aircraft or its passengers. Now, what makes it mysterious is that there were emergency lifeboats, vests, and other safety devices on the plane in case it needed to ditch, and the plane was built to be able to survive a landing at sea and float for several hours. None of these options evidently worked to ensure the survival of all 16 people on board. All search missions for them turned up empty. Later investigation proved that the last known signal recorded proved that the aircraft had diverted from its original route with no possible explanation as to why it happened. It was later concluded that the accident was due to poor pilot planning. Zeta Aosta was a man haunted by himself and unsure of his real personality, and that must have driven him to his unexplained disappearance. This featured a great deal in his life, driving him to great insecurity, drug use, and possible depression. He did many things at different times while trying to discover himself as a writer, lawyer, and activist. Aosta was a physically imposing man, described as a 300-pound Samoan by his friend and writer Hunter Thompson in his book Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. But the same cannot be said of his self-esteem, which drove him to make several rash and sentimental decisions. After a period of changing jobs and moving around, Aosta finally decided to be a lawyer. Aosta initially felt overwhelmed by his law career, and he left to run guns for revolutionaries, but was jailed for 2 years in Mexico. Being a person who never felt welcomed by his own Hispanic race, he took up defending young members of the Chicanos movement, whom he viewed as victims of a racist system when he came back to his practice. After taking a trip with his friend Hunter Thompson, Thompson wrote Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, based on Acosta's attributes and behavior during the trip, and the two had a fallout as a result of a dispute over recognition and publishing rights. And while Thompson gained fame, Aosta descended into petty thefts and other minor crimes to survive, while begging for support from his friend. Aosta went missing a while later, with his son claiming that he believes his father was murdered while trying to smuggle drugs into the US. Louis Le Prince is considered the father of cinematography. Sadly, he did not live long enough to enjoy the accolades that came with his creation, as he went missing not long after making it, one of the great mysteries of cinema history. Le Prince's name is largely unknown in history as the first person to create moving pictures, but his innovation sparked a lot of creativity within cinematography, which has evolved into the standard pictures existing today. Le Prince thrived in the UK and the US, and in October 1888, he filmed a moving picture sequence of family members in Roundhay Garden, and his son playing an instrument using a single-lens camera and paper film. Shortly before his disappearance, he had been planning a public demonstration of his camera in the US, but that never happened. Before going to the US, Le Prince returned to France to see his brother on September 16, 1890. He was last seen boarding a train to Paris to visit his friends and was never seen again afterward. The last person to see Le Prince alive was his brother, at the train station. Many people have since speculated on his fate, with theories ranging from suicide to murder by rival cinematographers. Some people believed that his project may have been unsuccessful and he had to commit suicide to escape his debts, that his family discovered he was homosexual, which is not proven, and that his brother may have killed him over the family's inheritance. Since numerous search missions and possible sightings of him did not turn up any leads, he was declared dead on 16 September 1897. The Martin family disappearance was described as one of the most baffling mysteries in Oregon. Unfortunately, nobody knows if it was a family trip gone wrong or an execution of the family. In the late morning of Sunday, December 7, 1958, the Martin family, Kenneth and Barbara the parents, and their 3 daughters, Barbara, Virginia, and Susan, took a day trip to gather greenery to make Christmas wreaths and decorations. On their way, the family stopped for food and gas, where they were seen by the waitress and attendant who attended to them at both places, but they were not seen after that. On December 9th, Kenneth's boss made the first official report of the family's disappearance when he failed to show up at his job, and the children's teachers also reported their absence from school afterward. The family's residence was checked for any signs of foul play, but the police found everything in order and the money in their account untouched. Police searched after Kenneth's boss filed the official report, but nothing happened. Various supposed eyewitness accounts were given, with none leading to the family except contributing to the growing pile of what-ifs. The police continued with their story of suspected foul play, as obvious tire marks belonging to the family's vehicle suggested that the family car must have been pushed off the cliff. Yet, neither the car nor the family turned up in the searches, till the bodies of Susan and Virginia Martin turned up not far from each other on May 3rd and 4th, 1959, and their possible cause of death was ruled as drowning. But the other 3 members of the family were never found. Ashley Summers was like every other teenager. At 14, she was sort of rebellious. She attended parties and behaved her age. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, she had gotten a tattoo of the word Jean with a heart about the boy she was dating then. This caused a disagreement between the young girl and her mother, since she did not seek permission before doing that. On July 4, 2007, the day she disappeared, Ashley had been at a pool party held at a relative's house. After spending time in the pool, she decided to visit her aunt, who lived a 10-minute walk from the pool. But she never arrived, and her disappearance was not noticed until 2 days later because she was fond of staying with relatives, so nobody thought anything of it. At the time she disappeared, Ashley had no phone with her, as her great uncle had broken her phone during an argument on the morning of her disappearance. She was last seen around 6 p.m. on the day she disappeared, and there have been no sightings of her since then. Initially, the police ruled her a runaway because of the disagreements she had with her relatives leading up to her disappearance, but her family disagreed. A search party looked for her but did not find her, and the FBI later speculated that she may have been a victim of kidnapping. But even the cases she was linked to provided no results. A month after her disappearance, her family received a call from a girl claiming to be her and assuring them that she was safe, and in 2015, someone reported that they spotted her at an ATM. But it turned out to be a rumor. In this video, Emanuela Orlandi's disappearance, or kidnap, we are not exactly sure which one it is, has to be the most controversial of all, with many theories, speculations, and powers at play. Orlandi was a 15-year-old Vatican girl who went missing on her way back home from music school on June 22, 1983. The case gained worldwide attention because it happened in the Vatican, and the Pope made a public appeal to the alleged international terrorist group who had claimed responsibility for her disappearance at the time. On the day of her disappearance, Emanuela was supposed to take the bus as she usually did, but the weather had been hot and she was running late, but her brother declined to take her to school as he had other commitments. At the end of her class, she called home to inform her sister that she had been offered a juicy deal to distribute Avon product flyers for 2 hours at a fashion show, after which she would be paid well, but her sister advised her to decline the offer as it sounded too good to be true. On the way home, she discussed the offer with 2 other girls and was last seen at the bus stop at 7:30 p.m. with an unidentified girl. She was declared missing when she did not make it home, and inquiries into her whereabouts did not turn up positive replies. After a fruitless police search, the family began to receive calls from people claiming to know the young girl's whereabouts, that she ran away to work with the Avon company, which was unlikely. A supposed terrorist organization later reached out, claiming to have kidnapped Orlandi and 1 other girl, and they would only release the girls in exchange for the criminal who tried to assassinate the Pope. These claims were later disputed with several other speculations that implicated prominent Vatican figures, but nothing was ever proven, and Orlandi was never found. Strangely, a woman will go missing in the commercial city of Los Angeles, and somehow, there will be no leads or anyone who saw something. That is the story of Jean Spangler, an American actress who appeared in numerous movies, mostly as a support for the main character, during her time. On the evening of October 7, 1949, Spangler left her home in Los Angeles, leaving her daughter with her sister-in-law, Sophie, with the claim that she was meeting her daughter's father to discuss child support and appear on set for a night shoot. A few hours after she left home, she called to speak with her daughter, informing her that she would have to work a full 8 hours on set and would be home later. Spangler was last seen by a seller at the farmer's market around 6 p.m., where it seemed like she was waiting for someone, and she had not been seen since then. The next morning, Sophie filed a missing persons report, and a search team of about 100 to 200 people went about searching for her. After a while, her purse was found with a note addressed to a person named Kirk at a park which read, "Kirk, can't wait any longer, going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way while mother is away," and ends with a comma. During interviews with their girlfriends, they alleged that Spangler was a few months pregnant and had been looking for a way to terminate it, though abortion was illegal at the time. This brought about the speculation that she may have died from a failed abortion, while some insisted that she went away with people she was connected with in a gang. Spangler remained missing, never making it to the appointments she told Sophie before she stepped out. More than half a century later, the 3 missing boys from Hannibal do not look like they will be returning home. Joey Hogue, aged 13 at the time, loved the outdoors and hoped to be the first person to visit the moon. He was more like an amateur scientist who was fond of exploring his surroundings and making discoveries. In his quest for knowledge, Joey learned that a new cave had been exposed by construction workers near his home, and he was excited to explore it. He rallied his younger brother Billy Hogue, aged 11, and their friend Craig Dowell, aged 14, for his little expedition, and all was set. Joey led his brother and friend to the cave on May 9, 1967, which made their parents furious when they found out later that night, and they barred them from attempting the dangerous trip again. This did nothing to stop the boys because they planned to revisit the cave after school the next day. With no cave expertise but bravery, the boys went back to explore the complex maze cave system, but they were never seen again. The largest cave search in US history began in Hannibal, Missouri, to rescue the boys, but there were no positive results. Their story continues to fascinate people worldwide ever since, with their loved ones hoping to finally solve the mystery and to learn what became of the children who simply seemed to vanish into thin air. Looks like Matank's demons pursued him till he had to disappear for safety. Lars Matan was named the most famous missing person on YouTube after videos of his last known whereabouts were uploaded on YouTube and watched repeatedly, resulting in over 16 million views. On 30 June 2014, Matan left Germany for the first time in the company of his friends to vacation in Varna, Bulgaria. The group stayed at a seaside resort where they engaged in a number of fun activities including swimming, playing football, visiting the beach, and clubbing. Matank's friends reported that he was relatively normal throughout the trip with no warning signs of a possible mental condition. On July 6, The day before they were meant to go back home, Matank got into a disagreement in a bar over football. After that, Matank left his friends at the bar and headed for a restaurant. He returned the next morning with a tale that the people he disagreed with the previous night hired 4 people to beat him up. At his insistence, his friends left Bulgaria without him since he could not travel with his injuries. Later, Matank began to act paranoid and nervous, calling his mother several times to report that he was in danger because some people were either trying to kill or rob him, so he instructed her to block his cards. During another call to his mother, Matank claimed that his attackers were drawing closer and expressed fear. On May 8th, the day he was supposed to return home, Matank arrived at the airport and consulted the doctor, but he soon ran out for fear of being killed there after a construction worker stepped into the doctor's office. That was the last time he was seen alive, with many speculations attributing his behavior to an undetermined mental illness. Another young man who seemed to have vanished into thin air. Brandon Swanson was a 19-year-old college student from Marshall, Minnesota, who can be considered a typical young person. He had been out celebrating the end of the spring semester with his friends and was on his way home when his car got into a ditch. The young man came out uninjured and called his parents to pick him up at about 2 a.m. He may have been unsure of his location because when his parents got to the location he gave on the phone, he claimed that he was flashing his lights so that his parents could identify him, but his parents saw nothing, even though they were also doing the same thing. He told them he could see the light from a neighboring town, so he would walk the distance so that his father could pick him up in the parking lot of a local bar. That way, they will not miss each other again. Swanson began to walk the distance to the town he identified, jumping fences and following back roads to reach there faster. The two remained on the call as they made their way there, but about 47 minutes into the call, Swanson's father heard him say, "Oh shit," and he went silent. They never heard from or saw him after that. When his parents made the first report, his mother recalled a police officer telling them it was the young man's right to be missing, given his age. Many thought he may have missed his way due to drunkenness from the celebration, but his friends confirmed that he did not drink enough to be drunk at the party. After many search missions with no trace of Swanson, his parents worked on having a bill passed that allowed the police to search for another adult immediately after they were declared missing rather than wait for later. The bill was passed and later named Brandon's Law, with neighboring states adopting it. How unsafe can stepping outside your home be? Branson Perry vanished mysteriously just outside his house in Skidmore, Missouri on April 11, 2001. Branson had a female friend over, and he had been cleaning out the house in preparation for receiving his father from the hospital in a few days. His female friend later recounted that 2 unidentified men were outside the house repairing a car belonging to the family, and at some point, one of them had entered the kitchen. While cleaning, Branson went to drop some cables in the shed, just outside the house. That was the last thing anyone knew of him. He disappeared without a trace, not carrying even his wallet or anything else. His female friend had left the house thinking that he just stepped away for a while, and the 2 repairmen had no clue what happened to him. His disappearance was only noticed a few days later when his grandmother stopped by and noticed that the house was unlocked with nobody home. His parents, who at the time were divorced, filed a missing person report together. The family and a search party went about searching abandoned holes, wells, public toilets, and everywhere else, but found no trace of their son. The cables he supposedly went out to drop at the shed were not found there when it was searched, and they will later return there a few days later, making it all the more mysterious because cables have no legs. The police chased several leads in his case, but concluded that it may be drug-related, as he revealed a few days before then that he was using, and was meant to check into a rehab after his father got back from the hospital. People speculated that perhaps he owed someone some drug money, or he was a victim of something awful. While the police declared a possible suspect, nobody has been officially arrested for his disappearance. Many of the unsolved mysteries in the world involve the sea, which rarely reveals its secrets, making the world wonder what happened and leaving a lot of questions unanswered. The Sarah Jo mystery is no different. What do we know? On 11 February 1979, the mystery began after 5 friends boarded their boat, the Sarah Jo, for leisure fishing on a beautiful day in Hawaii, but they never returned. Well, one did a decade later, just not alive. So, the modest boat was unequipped for major sea voyages, and it's reasonable to assume that the friends did not expect to do anything big since it was only leisure fishing for a few hours. Had they checked the weather reports, they would have known that sailing conditions were unfavorable that day. But as with sailors who are only billed to spend a few hours at sea, they made no adequate check. Within 2 hours of their departure, the local weather worsened, and one of the most chaotic storms in the history of the area began. The local authorities put out every boat and aircraft to search for them in better weather, but there was nothing. After the search was called off, their families pulled their resources to continue the search, but they also came up empty. On 19 September 1988, several of the people who participated in the initial search mission were on a routine mission to an uninhabited island. There, they found Sarah Jo and, not too far off, a shallow grave. Upon investigation, the bones belonged to one of the 5 men, Scott Moorman, but the other 4 remained untraceable. She was an Indian-American doctor who may or may not have been a victim of the 9/11 attack. She was last seen on September 10, 2001, which was her off day from work. Her husband, Lieberman, said she had planned to clean the apartment in preparation for her cousin's visit. That day, during a call with her mother, she mentioned that she would be visiting a restaurant at the World Trade Center, where her friend was to be married the next spring. Around noon, she went to the dry cleaners and went to shop for some items which security footage would later pinpoint as her last known location. Her husband returned to their apartment from work later that night, but did not meet his wife. He had no cause to worry initially, as she had been staying out all night frequently in the days leading up to that day. The next morning, he still did not find her at home before he went to work. In the evening, after the 9/11 attack, Lieberman was able to enter their apartment with his medical ID, but he found no traces of his wife. Her family declared her officially missing, and after an initial lack of action, the police began to investigate. The police report concluded that her recent alcoholism, marital and work problems may have led to her disappearance, but the family disagreed and insisted that since her home was near the site of the attack, she may have rushed over to help the victims. But she became a victim in the process. Snaha Philip was never found and was declared officially dead on the day of the attack, with her family suing to have her included as a victim of the attack, which was done. This made her the 2,751st victim of the attack. Richard Cox was an American second-year cadet at the United States Military Academy in West Point, New York. He disappeared on 14 January 1950 from the training vicinity after meeting with a friend. His story has several parts to it, and many speculations can be derived from it, which makes his case a mysterious one to solve. Within the time leading up to his disappearance, Cox had a friend referred to as George, a name that may be false, whom he hung out with on numerous occasions. Cox told his mates at the academy that he served together with George in Germany. His mates recalled that Cox had appeared to have an obvious distaste for the man, because of how he bragged about his cruelty back in Germany. One of the cadets who handled the phones later reported that the man had called to speak with Cox at some point, and he sounded rather insulting and patronizing. One time, George visited Cox within the academy, and the cadets who saw him later described him. On 14 January 1950, George visited Cox for the 3rd time. Cox returned to his room and mentioned to his roommates that George had requested to hang out with them again. According to his mates, he appeared disgusted by the offer but not apprehensive. The 2 men left the academy, never to be seen again. When it became evident that he was missing, a search was put out for him with aircraft and water equipment, but nothing positive turned up from the search. Evidence arising from an investigation indicated that the man claiming to be George may have recruited Cox for some undercover work for a secret agency, offering him a new identity and a chance to start afresh because Cox may have disliked the academy. Some people reported to have seen him on 2 occasions, under a different name and for a short period. The disappearance of the 3 lighthouse keepers at the Flannan Isles Lighthouse in 1900 is a mysterious and tragic event. The lighthouse, located on Eilean Moor in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland, was manned by 3 experienced keepers, James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. On December 15, 1900, a passing ship noticed that the lighthouse was not operational and reported it. A relief vessel was sent to investigate the passing ship's claims. When the relief crew arrived, they found the lighthouse empty. The door was unlocked. 2 of the 3 oilskins were missing. and the kitchen table had been overturned. The gate to the compound and the gate were closed. The bed was unmade and the clock unwound. But later investigation revealed that the kitchen was tidy, which may mean that whatever took place happened after dinner. The logbook entry stopped on December 15, and there were no signs of any of the keepers. Several theories have been proposed to explain their disappearance, including a rogue wave washing them away, an accident while trying to secure a crate of supplies, or even abduction by foreign spies. However, no conclusive evidence has ever been found, and the fate of the 3 keepers remains a mystery. Another theory takes the psychology of the keepers into account. For instance, MacArthur was known to get angry easily. This may have led to a fight breaking out near the edge of the cliff that caused all men to fall to their deaths. Or even worse, one may have killed the other 2 before taking his own life. This theory also considers the overturned kitchen table and the missing oilskins, which could indicate a struggle. In this story, it looks like the boogeyman paid a visit to southwestern Vermont from 1945 to 1951, as numerous people disappeared during that time without a trace. The name Bennington Triangle was coined by American author Joseph Citro to refer jointly to the areas where the disappearances occurred. The first known disappearance within the area was Middle River, which disappeared in 1945. Rivers was a 74-year-old experienced outdoorsman who disappeared on November 12 during a weekend hunting trip with 4 others. He separated from the group on that day and promised to return shortly, but he never did. Another was Paula Weldon, an 18-year-old sophomore who went out on a hike and never returned on December 1, 1946. 3 years later after Weldon, on the same day, James Tedford was said to have disappeared during a bus ride. He was last seen before and during the bus ride, but nobody could account for him afterward, even though later evidence suggests that he didn't vanish on the bus. In 1950, Paul Jepson, an 8-year-old, accompanied his mother on a truck ride, but he disappeared when he was left unattended by his mother for about an hour. 16 days after Jepson vanished, Frida Langer left her family's campsite for a hike. During the journey, she slipped into a stream and told her companion that she would go back to the site, get a change of clothes, and join him. But Langer never made it back to the campsite. Instead, her body was found the next year, on May 12, in a condition that did not allow an autopsy to determine her cause of death. How else can an area be more haunted except in this manner? Juan's unsolved disappearance remains a mystery with a lot of speculation. The incident leading to his disappearance happened on June 25, 1986. The 10-year-old boy had accompanied his truck dad and his mom on a trip when they got into an accident. The truck was reportedly carrying pure sulfuric acid, and it came down the Somosierra mountain in Madrid, Spain. Eyewitnesses thought the brakes were not working, but later findings would reveal that they were in perfect condition, and the truck's driver may have been speeding deliberately. Rescuers rushed to neutralize the acid which poured from the truck after the accident by pouring lime and sand, but the couple found inside after 3 hours of trying to reach them were soaked in acid and dead. A call was placed to Juan's maternal grandmother to inform her of the situation, and she asked if Juan was safe, which made the responders aware that he was on the trip, but he was not in the truck when his parents were found. Apparently, Juan's father had promised to take him on a trip if he made good grades, which he did. A search was conducted to find Juan, but he was never found. Initial speculation suggested that his body dissolved in the acid, but chemists discredited it as humans cannot dissolve immediately in sulfuric acid. Others suggested that Juan survived the initial accident, and the other persons involved in the crash tried to get him to a hospital, but he died in the process, so they got rid of the body as they were involved in the accident, and did not want to have any problems with the law. Ben Needham was a 21-month-old baby who went missing on the Greek island of Kos on 24 July 1991. On the day he disappeared, his mother went to work, leaving him in the care of his grandparents. Usually, Ben either played with his teenage uncle or around a farmhouse that the family was renovating at the time. Ben had been coming in and out of the farmhouse that day, but around 2:30 p.m., his family discovered that he had disappeared. How far can a child that's barely 2 go? Well, Ben must have gone pretty far at the time his family realized his disappearance because initial searches around the area did not provide the boy. The family notified the police, and the search was further delayed as they were the first suspects being investigated in the case. Over 11 days, Ben was searched for by the police, army, and fire brigade, but none of the security operatives turned up with him. As the years went by, the South Yorkshire police used an age progression device to produce software images of how Ben may appear as he grew older to further the search, but Ben was never found. Several possible sightings of him were checked out with the same negative results. At first, he was believed to have been kidnapped, but the theory that was later sustained was that Ben must have been accidentally killed and buried in rubble by an excavator driver working in a field around where he was last seen. An excavation of the rubble was done by the British and Greek police, but no vital findings pointed to Ben's whereabouts. Looks like Hurricane Andrew was not the only destructive occurrence of August 1992, as it came with the disappearance of the 13-year-old Lei Oki. On the morning of August 27, Lei's mother left her at home and went to her work. Lei had planned to attend an open house at her middle school with her grandmother during the day. However, according to her mother, Vicky Felton, when she arrived at the office, she was notified that Hurricane Andrew was headed to Tupelo, Mississippi, and she felt the need to inform her daughter. Felton called Lei, but she got no response. She became worried and headed home to check on her, but she was greeted by an open garage and lights on. Inside the house, there was blood smeared on the wall, and in Lei's room, her favorite blanket was discarded on the floor. Felton called 911 and a search commenced for her daughter, but she was never found. An additional pool of blood was discovered in the girl's bedroom, and a bloody nightwear was dug out of the laundry hamper with blood on the bathroom floor, which indicated that someone had tried to clean the scene. Some of Lei's belongings were considered missing, among other things that were disturbed in the house. Further investigation revealed that her mother was not totally honest during all 3 examinations conducted on her mother, but she claimed that she had no hand in her daughter's disappearance. On September 9, a package containing Lei's glasses was mailed to her stepfather, but no positive leads were generated from the package. Lei's father, who was divorced from her mother and living in a different place, believed that his daughter was beaten to death by someone at her mother's house. He later said that the locals had told him to look at her mother, that is, Lei's mother, his ex-wife. Maybe Walsh was simply a victim of her job, we will never know. But here is what we know. Susan Walsh was a writer, stripper, and journalist who had written about some dangerous subjects about the Russian mafia and the vampire community. Though these works were never published, as her bosses felt that the articles were not objective, one could only think that she may have offended some people while doing the research for her articles. Walsh left her apartment on July 16, 1996 to run errands and use the payphone across the street, leaving her son with her estranged husband who lived in the apartment below them. But she never made it back home. At the time of her disappearance, she was working as a freelance journalist and stripper to support herself and her son, and was interested in writing and talking about the sex industry and the possible disadvantages for immigrants and women who work there. When she disappeared, her friends feared that she may have relapsed into her drug addiction, but she had been sober for 11 years prior to that time. The police investigated her disappearance, which led to 2 discoveries. That the month of July 1996 was missing from the calendar in her apartment, and she mentioned on 2 occasions that she had a stalker. Nothing about her disappearance was successfully linked to the stalker, but a lot of people believe that some of her works as a journalist, particularly the one on the mafia, may have landed her in trouble, but that was also not proven. Eon Patz was a 6-year-old boy described as sweet, trusting, and quick to see the positive rather than the negative side of everything. On May 25, 1979, Eon was allowed to walk to the bus stop alone. After he made the request repeatedly, the bus stop was only 2 blocks away from their home, so his mother allowed him to feel pretty positive about it. Eon had $1 with him to buy soda at a corner deli when he left home. His parents never knew he was missing till he did not come back home from school. It was later confirmed that he neither made it to the bus stop nor school, which means he disappeared on his way to the bus stop. Eon was thought to have been abducted by an adult, though no ransom was ever demanded for him. At the time he disappeared, there was no social media or cameras in front of stores, but his disappearance went viral, especially because of the pictures of him on the missing person flyers, which had him smiling in a carefree and innocent manner. Eaton would later inspire the culture of having missing children displayed on milk cartons in the US. However, the circulation did nothing to bring him back home. Many investigators became highly invested in the case, following numerous leads to bring him home. But their efforts and his parents' faith that he would be found went unrewarded. 2 men were separately suspected in Eaton's case to have possibly abducted and abused him, with one of them, Jose Ramos, later getting sentenced for similar crimes. This feels like a story pulled out of a true crime podcast, or could it be that of a dissatisfied housewife who found a way to leave? Joan Rish was a homemaker and editor who had a troubled past, and some events leading to her disappearance make us wonder if it was staged or real. On October 24, 1961, Joan had a normal routine, dropping off one of her children with a neighbor and taking the other on a shopping trip. She bought a few things and later went for an appointment with the dentist. Later, according to the neighbors, she was seen moving between the house and the garage holding something that may have looked red. Between her and the neighbor, Barbara Barker, their children had stayed over at each other's residence within the day while Joan pruned some plants. Later, Barbara took Joan's daughter back home so that she could go out to shop with her kids. When she got back, Joan's daughter came back to inform her that Joan was gone and the kitchen was covered with red paint. Barbara invited the police after confirming the story, and an investigation began. The kitchen, room upstairs, and the driveway were covered with blood, which must have belonged to Joan. A search was conducted and questions were asked, but while there may have been initial sightings of a woman who may be Joan, she was not found. It was later discovered that over the summer of 1961, Joan had borrowed over 25 books from the library about missing persons cases and murders. One of those books detailed a scenario similar to what happened during her disappearance, supporting the claim that she may have staged it to get away. Loren Ron disappeared from her home in Manchester, New Hampshire on April 26 or 27, 1980. She was a 14-year-old who was said to be happy and outgoing, but troubled. At 14, she was already smoking marijuana and drinking alcohol, and sometimes she talked of running away. On the night she disappeared, Loren had declined to go out of town with her mom to watch her mother's boyfriend play tennis. She stayed back with a male and female friend, and they drank alcohol together. The male friend left when they heard noises in the hall, thinking that it was Loren's mother while the female friend slept over. When her mother returned, she noticed that the bulbs in the hallway were unscrewed and her apartment door was unlocked. Inside, she saw a figure on her daughter's bed and assumed it was Loren, but she later discovered that it was Loren's friend. According to the friend, Loren had left the bed to sleep on the couch during the night, but was unsure due to her drunken state. Loren's mother and her boyfriend went out to search for her that night after noticing that the back door was open, but Loren was neither found that night nor later. Loren's mother and other family members would later recount that after Loren's disappearance, they received odd calls, some of which were traced to a hotel where they shot child pornography. This may be the warning sign you need to never mess with the mafia because it never ends well. Jimmy Hoffa was an American union leader known to be associated with the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, where he served as president from 1957 till 1971. He became involved with organized crime from his early years working with the Teamsters, and he had traces of mafia connection while at it. He was convicted for several offenses and was sentenced to 13 years in prison. After gaining his freedom, he sought to return to being president of the association, which made him acquire more enemies. Hoffa devoted his time to making that happen, and his efforts began to scare his son, who felt that they were at risk because of the mafia's involvement. On July 30, 1975, he was scheduled to have a meeting in a familiar place with 2 people linked to the mafia for settlement over his ambition, but the men never showed up. Hoffa called his wife and friend at separate times to complain about what happened, but he never made it home from the meeting. The next morning, a missing person report was filed and security agencies including the FBI joined to search for him, with his family offering a reward to anyone who had information. It is widely believed that he was killed by his enemies in the mafia because his return to the association may be a threat to the pension fund. An FBI source later revealed that he knows who assassinated Hoffa, but the person will never be prosecuted, as that will lead to revealing informants and confidential sources.